Hello everybody and welcome back to Estoril for the third and final race of the weekend for what has already been a very dramatic opening round of the season for the Radical European Masters. So we had a win in race 1 for James Littlejohn and Tony Wells. Victory in race 2 went to Paddy McLuhan, who did the race single-handedly. But the talking point of race 2 was an absolutely horrendous accident involving Phil Keane and Andrea Fausti, and I think the most important news, because we couldn't confirm it on air in race 2, is that they are absolutely okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Both drivers are absolutely fine. Just testament really to the strength of the FIA chassis in both cars, that they could walk away with not a scratch on them. But no, disappointing that they won't be able to join the grid for this final race. Yeah,
the chassis, it's safe to say that the news is slightly less good. The car's very badly damaged. Should introduce ourselves, by the way. It's Ben Evans and Will Brown from Radical Cars, talking you through the action for this concluding 60-minute race of the weekend. So we're just running down the grid. So James Littlejohn to start sharing the front row with Matt Howells. Then we have got Andrew Ferguson and Ozzy Yusuf on row 2. And yeah, it was slightly strange for Ozzy Yusuf in race 1, because taking over from Tom Ashton, who led the early running, that car really did fade. It's the third row of the grid. Ricardo Dona to the front of the Supersport class.
Yeah, Ricardo had a great race in the last one, but ultimately was pipped by Colin Noble and Phil Abbott, founder, of course, of Radical Sports Cars, in the final 9 laps. And there's Marcello Maritiotto, always a very familiar face on Radical, both UK domestic and European grids, and he'll be looking to hopefully score a win in this final race.
Phil Abbott starts the number 60 car that he shares with Colin Noble, and they were in fine fettle during the second race, and Colin in particular really pushing hard. Yanni Herpia having a busy weekend, because he will have, across free practice qualifying the races, have had something like 7 hours worth of track time the last 3-4 days here in Estoril. And the same goes for Jim Booth in the Spider. Jim has been getting quicker and quicker as the weekend has worn on, and that means that he's got quite a beneficial pit handicap position. Meanwhile, Alan Costa starts the number 20 car that he shares with Johan Scheer. The pair of them, certainly in the case of Johan, have been right on the pace throughout the course of the event. And then at the back of the grid, it's John Corbett, who is going to be sharing with Paddy McLuhan. That's John in the car now. He didn't get to race in the car that he would have shared with Andrea Fausti earlier on. So it's been accommodated in Paddy McLuhan's entry. So we'll have a look a second at the grid in full before the cars go off on their formation lap ahead of a 60-minute race for the Radical European Masters. There is, of course, the mandatory pit stop that comes between 25 and 35 minutes. I think we've got somebody with a little bit of a problem on the grid there. One or two.
There's a little bit of a delay at the tail there, doesn't there? But as the officials just walk off. Here we go. Sure enough.
So front row of the grid then: James Littlejohn and Manhal Alos. Then it's Andrew Ferguson and Ozzy Yusuf on row 2 from Ricardo Dona and Marcello Maritiotto, Phil Abbott and Yanni Herpia. The third row ahead of Jim Booth and Costa, and then Paddy McLuhan sharing with John Corbett, and it's John Corbett who starts that car from 11th place. As the countdown continues to get this final race of the weekend underway for the Radical European Masters, the heat haze shimmering off the track surface.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that the drivers will be feeling at the end of this race. The wind has dropped a little bit from this morning, and the track temperature and the air temperature is appreciably higher. So yeah, they're going to have the work cut out across this 60 minutes of frenetic racing.
Yeah, the weather's just got better and better as the weekend's unfolded. Friday, which was the qualifying day, it was humid and showery. Yesterday it was really quite damp and cold in the morning, and then got a little bit nicer into the afternoon, and then today has been absolutely glorious late spring sunshine. And this Estoril circuit, a real challenge for these drivers, because it is it's a technical track, but of the old school. Lots of mid-speed, long radius corners. It puts a strain on the drivers, and more importantly, it puts a strain on those Dunlop tyres.
It does, yeah, and it's been a great leveller this weekend because the SR3 Supersport racers who are sort of would traditionally would be struggling certainly on straight line pace against the SR8s and the RXC Spiders at the longer, more modern Grand Prix circuits, although places like Spa and Silverstone, what have you. They've really been able to revel in the conditions here because with the lighter tyre usage and with all of those mediums to speed corners, they really suit the SR3's balance down to the ground. So we've seen some great midfield battles and a couple of the Supersports racers just narrowly missing out on a overall podium position in that last race.
Well, this is going to be a really fascinating race, I think, because we've got the one pro driver in James Littlejohn who's taking the start of the race, but then we've got lots of pro drivers, Johan Scheer, Alex Kapadia taking over Paddy McLuhan as well for the second half of the race. And what that means for Littlejohn is that he needs to get as big a buffer as possible, not least because he and Tony Wells have got an extra 10 seconds over the rest of the field to spend in the pits as a result of their first and third place finishes already this weekend, triggering the pit handicap.
And we've seen that Scheer and Kapadia will be taking over from Alos, have definitely had the pace this weekend, and James Littlejohn's been able to do all that he can, but certainly Alos has been able to match and in some cases best that of Wells. So it's going to be interesting, and it's always that dynamic in the second half of the race once the pit stops have been played out and the various penalties, to see drivers out of position trying to fight their way back up through, and then of course the issue of traffic and back markers comes into play. So it's going to be an interesting race.
Yeah, they've got to be sensible, haven't they? That's the key. Not do anything too silly as they're coming to the end of this green flag formation lap before we get ready for the rolling start and this concluding race of the weekend for the Radical European Masters Championship. So it's the blue and white car of James Littlejohn on the front row. Alongside him is the black and white car of Man Halls. Then it is the all blue car of Andrew Ferguson and the yellow entry of Ozzy Youssef. And again, you shouldn't discount Andrew Ferguson here because he has got the benefit of no pit handicap to speak of, and therefore if the Spider works well, he could be a factor too. Pace car peels off, waiting for the red lights to change. We're about to go racing for the final time in Estoril as the lights go now, and away we go. Who's got the jump as they head towards the first corner? Some long sprint down the start and finish straight, and look at Andrew Ferguson go in the Spider. That is a car that punches in a straight line, and James Littlejohn needs to defend into turn one. He does that. He covers the inside line. Andrew Ferguson swoops across into second and gets some assistance from Halal. So we've got another car in trouble further back, and that is Ricardo Dona, who has had a spin and unfortunately has come to a complete standstill. So Ozzy Youssef looks to the inside of Andrew Ferguson. Manhalals has found a way past him already, and from the back of the grid, Alan Costa already making super progress and darting to the inside, so it would have appeared, of Ozzy Youssef.
Yeah, likewise Corbett there just been able to make a pass on Maritiotto from the back row of the grid. So he's of course sharing with McLuhan our race 2 winner, and really McLuhan was any match for Kapadia, certainly in the second half of the race earlier on today. So yeah, they're going to be a pairing to watch later on.
Well, it's quite satisfying in the black car and the black helmet to call the Australian driver John Corbett in all black, because that is the livery he's running with. As here is another look at the start. Now, what happened for Ricardo Dona? Oh, it's just a little bit of a tag, wasn't it, from Jim Booth? Not sure that Dona quite saw where Booth was and looked to turn across him. Just got the tag. He's back underway. Meanwhile, here's the fight for third. Andrew Ferguson ahead of Ozzy Youssef. Then we've got Alan Costa behind, with Yanni Herpia holding down a very strong 6th place on this first lap, and then John Corbett looking to gain ground. Now, the good news here for Manhalalos is that he's been able to clear Andrew Ferguson fairly early. That means that he will lose ground probably to James Littlejohn, but still give Alex Kapadia a good shot into the latter phase of the race. Now, meanwhile, we're going to have quite the sort out for third place as they head down the start and finish straight, not least because look at the straight line speed of the Spider, and it means that we have got Alan Costa challenging Ozzy Youssef on the brakes into turn one. That looks very, very tight. Ozzy Youssef finds the outside traction. Costa draws alongside as the pair of them run downhill together, and Costa makes the move stick before they get to turn two. Also ducking into the pit lane was Phil Abbott, unfortunately. the end of lap 1.
Yeah, that was a really good bold move there from Costa to make his intentions clear early on and stake that ground right behind, and of course that then gave him the opportunity in the second half of the into the second corner to really make it stick.
And now already Alain Costa in pursuit of Andrew Ferguson, but Ferguson able to make ground. There is Phil Abbott, and search underway for the relevant tools. Called a glimpse of James Littlejohn. Here is Mal Halalos in second place, then the dust up for third, and Alain Costa might fancy his chances into turn 7, as if by cue. It's £5 well spent, to make my point, as he slips past, gains the position, Alain Costa. And this is about knowing the characteristics of the car, because now Alain Costa needs to build about half a second over Andrew Ferguson, so Ferguson doesn't power back past him along the start and finish straight. Yeah,
there's a certain cat and mouse element really to the characteristics of these cars. Of course, that superior straight line speed of and just the huge torque of the 3.5 EcoBoost in the RXC Spider is giving them a real straight line advantage. But then around the tight, twisty, complex sections of the course, the SRX can pass straight back.
And likewise, the SR3 of Yanni Herpia is keeping Ozzy Yusuf very honest through the twisty bits. This is a great start to the race for Yanni Herpia. In second place in the Supersport class, it's Marcello Maracchiotto, and third of the Supersport runners is Ricardo Dona, having recovered from his spin, headlights ablaze, in pursuit of Jim Booth. John Corbett maybe not quite making the progress that we'd have expected, but then again, John has spent all weekend practicing in the Spider and then has been catapulted into the SR8 for this race, so he's learning a little bit as he goes in these early stages.
Yeah, he's just managed to overtake Marcello. Oh no, actually the Maracchiotto and fighting back there uphill.
Well, this is really the characteristic of the straight line speed of the SR8. I'd expect if John Corbett doesn't have something go terribly wrong through turn 4 that he'll be able to...
And all the while here, of course, we've got Ricardo Dona, who's on his recovery drive back after that first corner spin.
We do, and he's already found a way past Jim Booth in the early stages of this lap. It's a great livery that Jim Booth's got on his car. I really like the two different shades of blue.
Yeah, it's very much inspired by the LMPC car, the challenge car that he's been involved with in IMSA in competition in America. So yeah, really distinctive livery for his European debut. More used to racing in the Radical USA Cup, of course.
As Ricardo Dona jinks to the inside of John Corbett, finds a way through. Dona in pursuit to Marcello Maracchiotto. Now, what's slightly unusual here is Maracchiotto, yes, he's just found a way past John Corbett, seems to be having a reasonably restrained start to this race. Little John's lead over Manhal Alos out to 6.7 seconds. Alos is, no, it's not, 7.5 seconds now at the end of lap 3. Alos's advantage over Alain Costa is a further 6.7 seconds. But this, whilst important, is all about setting up for the second half of the race. We knew that James Littlejohn was going to disappear into the sunset because he needs to give Tony Wells a buffer and to overcome the pit handicaps. Whereas for Alos and Costa, that is slightly less urgent for them. Andrew Ferguson maintaining that 4th position. So Yusuf in 5th now, finally starting to shake off the attentions of Yanni Herpia. And then it is Marcello Maracchiotto who is a little bit adrift of that, but with Ricardo Dona snapping in at his heels. Along the back stretch behind the pit section, and this Estoril circuit really unchanged since the days of Formula 1 here. All that they've really done is moved some of the Armco barriers back and also reprofiled the first couple of corners to promote a little bit more overtaking.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. I think it's nearly 20 years now since this incredible venue held a Grand Prix. But no, it's still a really popular one with Radical racers. And it's been a few years since we last came here. I think the European Masters was last year in 2011. So it's great. It's such a leveller as a circuit to bring the various classes together. There's not clearly one dominant sort of model really. So whereas you go somewhere like Spa, we're going to expect to see the RXC Spiders sort of quite clearly having the straight line grunt, particularly on the run up through Kemmel.
Absolutely, as we have got this pursuit through the Parabolica, Andrew Ferguson and Ozzy Yusuf, as the pair of them then accelerate along the start and finish straight and down towards turn 1. on the brakes, and Ferguson, that straight line speed coupled with the relative reluctance, I'd say, of Yusuf to really risk the car in these early stages is.
Yeah, you do get the feeling that that Yusuf's just keeping his powder dry a little bit for later on in the race, as we've seen. Some of the SR8s, particularly with these high temperatures, they'll start to slide around in the second half of the race as the tyres have just given their best, and of course that's when you're tempted to overdrive and overcorrect, and that just exacerbates the problem. So, he just needs to keep a level head at the moment, and of course the other thing as well is all the while at the moment he's really riding that dirty air of that. Of the toe of the RXC, which isn't going to help him either.
No, but it's a real balance, isn't it? Because the RXC punches such a big hole through the air, but at the same time, it is a very potent car in a straight line. And for Ozzy Yusuf, that means frustration heaped upon frustration in trying to find a way past.
Yeah, and all the while out the front, of course, James Littlejohn is continuing to pull out that lead. He's just set another fastest lap of the race with a 1:40.7. So even in these high temperatures, there's no real sign of the pace dropping off. That's a good 9-second advantage at the front end.
Yeah, he really is.
In fact, 11 seconds on that last lap.
Showing off a little bit, isn't he, James Littlejohn? And building a really, really big advantage now at the front of the field.
If you consider that his next closest challenger is likely to be at the mid stage, probably Costa in turn, and he really needs to build a good 20-25 second buffer going into the pit stops to give Wells a chance of making it to the flag first.
Now, here is a challenge. Riccardo Donà on Marcello Marattiotto as they head into turn one, and Donà launches a move to the inside. Marattiotto tries to shut the door and almost comes together, but Riccardo Donà gains the place, recovering very well from that spin. I think the challenge here for Donà is he has gone a long way around the Estoril circuit single-handedly this weekend, is whether or not he's going to find the energy to last at this level of intensity through to the end of the race.
When you consider that an SR3 will pull up to 2G on these Dunlop tyres, it's a lot of strain, and just see a replay of it here again. Nice and early, straight on the brakes, and really an arrow straight line to the apex that left Marattiotto nowhere to go. But he'll be feeling his neck and his back certainly tonight. I'm sure on the flight home he'll be feeling it. It'll be quite tired, but a brief lock up there, but holds his line well and starts to pull out some air already from Marcello.
Into the
we're starting to get, obviously now we're some 10 minutes into the race, and already 13 seconds now advantage for Littlejohn.
Yeah, Littlejohn is doing exactly what he needs to do, and that's going to be the key for him, isn't it? It's just whether or not that's going to be enough, of course, for Tony Wells with that additional pit handicap, because really Littlejohn has now only bought Tony Wells 3 seconds over Alex Kapadia because of the way that the pit handicap's going to work themselves out. So that is going to add a level of complexity here for Littlejohn. So he needs to just keep pressing on as hard as he can. Alos and Costa likewise, as long as they stay more or less in touch. Now, in terms of Alos and Kapadia, that is 106 seconds they're going to be spending in the pits, and Costa and Shear 101 seconds in the pits. So there's only 5 seconds in it between them. Therefore, Alos having that 5-second advantage over Alain Costa, that's particularly key, because I suspect that Johan Shear and Alex Kapadia will struggle to overtake each other. They're going to be very evenly matched, and therefore if Alos can build up something in the region of, say, 10 seconds over Alain Costa, that could be decisive. But last time around it was Costa who was the quicker of them, and it's looking to be the same again on this lap.
Yeah, and again he's setting a 1:40.7 versus the 42.4 of Alos. So I mean Costa's really been quite unlucky this weekend, but he's definitely got the measure of Alos on this occasion, and I mean that gap now down to 5.2 seconds. So he's just within a whisker of being able to hold on to the lead through post pit stops.
Certainly is, as they accelerate out the parabolic again. This is the battle for 4th and 5th place. Andrew Ferguson and Ozzy Yusuf. Across the line they flash, and downhill sharply towards the braking zone at turn 1. And again, Yusuf unable to do anything about Andrew Ferguson. Ferguson just buying himself those 10 or so metres that he needed on that section of the track. And as you say, well, this is the game of cat and mouse that we're coming to enjoy, the back and forth between them, as he's trying to close up in the Supersport class. Herpia leads that. Ricardo Donado closing up onto his tail at a rate of some 2 seconds a lap.
Yeah, he's really, this is going to rage all the way to the pit stops, isn't it? As you can see, there's the straight line advantage of the Spider and just being thwarted all the time.
And so we have got a quarter of the race that's unfolded. We are still 10 minutes away from the pit window opening, and that's when we'll start to see the order getting jumbled up just a little bit. I think the other question mark here is the progress that Paddy McLuhan can make later on, having taken over from John Corbett. This is the closest battle we've got on track between Ozzy Yusuf and Andrew Ferguson.
Yeah, the rest of the order elsewhere seems to be fairly stable at the moment. I think there's an element of suck it and see for a lot of these teams. They've seen how the tyre sort of degradation has affected them in the second half of the race, and we did see a few people drop off the pace quite considerably in the dying stages. So there might be I think there's a few conservative teams that haven't quite shown their full hand and true pace yet.
I think after the events of the race earlier on today, the Radical mechanics will be quite glad to be seeing a relatively stable race, as Little John continues to build his lead over Manhals. That's now up to 17.1 seconds. Alison Costa is pegged at 5 seconds apiece, and that could be very, very close, particularly as if Johan Scheer and Alex Padilla start battling with each other, then that might give Tony Wells the opportunity to try and escape. Well, out of turn 4, the Ferguson and Yusuf battle. It's going to be the sprint from 4 to 6 that's going to give Andrew Ferguson the opportunity to...
I'm just wondering if there's this pair of battling, whether or not this is bringing Yanni back into favour again. It just does seem to be no... Oh, hang on a second, here we go. Yusuf finally found a way past as Ferguson runs wide on the outside of the corner there.
And that was really set up coming out of turn 4. Ferguson didn't get the run on Ozzy Yusuf that he needed to, and Ozzy Yusuf goes through, gains 4th position, and again, for Ozzy Yusuf to hand over to Tom Ashton for the second half of the race, there's a possibility, isn't there, that Tom Ashton could bring that yellow car up onto the podium, as this is...
Yeah, if you look at the pit stop penalties there, they've got a good 20-second advantage over Wells and Littlejohn in the stop. So this could be, I think Yusuf will be really glad to be past that big RXC Spider and finally make some headway.
Now, the question is, of course, whether Andrew Ferguson can chase down Ozzy Yusuf down the straight. The answer is absolutely no, he can't, and therefore the gap remains much as it was. But it's going to be through these twisty bits where Ozzy Yusuf should be able to break clear just a little bit.
Yeah, so for Yusuf, he's 26.5 behind Littlejohn, with just under 10 minutes to go before the pit stop window. So it's, now is really the time that he needs to attack and try and close up the gap that he's got to Costa.
Around the Parabolica comes the race leader, James Littlejohn. And Littlejohn's such a versatile driver, because when he's not in Radicals, he can be found in the Fun Cup. He can also be found in historic Formula 1, which is arguably a lot more fun than the Fun Cup.
And that was probably what gave him the real advantage in qualifying. We had some quite treacherous, well, not so much treacherous, but certainly tricky conditions in qualifying. There was a good short, sharp shower before the qualifying began, and with the track being quite green, it's still quite early in the season here. It was really quite slippery, and of course, with his experience of big power, low grip cars, he could really pilot that SR8 well in those conditions, as he always does.
I mean, our reflection on that really is that we need to arrange a day with an SR8 and a historic Formula 1 car for this commentary team, so that we can actually find out for ourselves whether or not it's given James
and give an informed decision. I think that's an excellent idea.
The fact Phil Abbott's not protested it, we'll take that as consent that he's agreed to it, as Little John negotiates turn 6, and Little John's advantage over Manhal's out to 20.8 seconds, and just trying to think what sort of advantage Tony Wells is going to need to give him confidence to defending it. It's probably going to need to be post pit stops. If it's anything north of 25 seconds, then that starts to look quite good for Tony. But it also means that James has got a little bit of a dilemma, as do the team here, which is how hard do they ask James to push, recognising that that risks excess wear on the Dunlop tyre, versus do they get James to run at a more sensible pace, not build as much an advantage, but it gives Tony the confidence the grip's going to be there for his stint.
It's a real double-edged sword, because as you say, to push now is ultimately to cost Tony later in the race. So I'm sure he'll be the absolute being as economical as he can with his steering inputs and his throttle inputs to try and keep as much tread as possible on those tyres. As we're seeing here, Manhal is looking pretty good at the moment. He's lapping in the 142s, which is about the best pace he's shown all weekend, which is great, and he'll be in a great position to hand over to Capadia for hopefully a podium finish.
And the thing with Manhal this weekend is he's been so consistent. In years gone by, it hasn't been an alien sight to see Manhal's piloting a sideways SR8, and that's not been the case this weekend. The cars seems to be beautifully set up. It's not been moving around too much, and it's really paying dividends in terms of the results.
It's been a very mature drive from Alos this weekend, as you say. He's not always had the greatest of luck, and it'd be fair to say he's been involved in quite a lot of the exciting action that we've seen in Radical European Masters over the last few years. But no, this is a supremely confident driver so he's got a lot of experience in the SR8s and the last 4 or 5 years. But no, this is exactly what we'd like to see from him.
But he is being caught by Alain Costa now. And that is significant, because if things stay as they are until the pit stops, then it means that Johan Scheer is going to be fed out ahead of Alex Capadia. And that will be bad news for Alex and Manhal. It'll be good news for Johan Scheer. And it will release Johan to try and chase down Tony Wells. We've got the pit window opening in another 5 minutes. And that means that we'll probably expect to see Alain Costa coming in soon after the pit window opens. The way that it works, I should explain, is that they have to go past the pit lane open board before they can come into the pits, which equalises the benefit for those with and without radios.
Yes, and you're also limited to the number of team members that you can put on the car as well. So that just helps to keep the cost down, obviously, with fewer staff. But it's going to be interesting. And of course, the Masters class cars have all got to refuel, so there'll be an extra 15 seconds there, which is possibly going to bring some of these SR3s into play as well.
Yeah, it's fairly safe to say the drivers in the Radical European Masters Championship don't come with an enormous entourage.
No, and it's very much encouraged. We try to encourage people to get as much mechanical knowledge under the car, although pretty much everybody runs with the team in European Masters. It's of a real advantage to a driver to sort of understand exactly what's happening underneath them and how the car works. You always find that the best drivers are those that have got a degree of mechanical understanding about what they're driving. So it's very much encouraged right from the early stages when you start out in the Radical SR1 Cup as a novice. All of that training and advice in terms of car setup and maintenance is included, and people are very much encouraged to maintain the car as much as they can themselves, because it does result in better racers.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key. As a driver, you almost need to learn that beginner's guide to physics just to get a sense of what the car's doing on the track, because that will then feed into the way that you respond to it, and as you start to understand that, then you start to begin to play with the setup of the car and understanding what you need the car to do and what you need it not to do.
Yeah, and even when you're working with a team, then you can give much more informed decision and feedback to your drivers, to your team members as to exactly what's happening on track and how it can be adjusted.
Alain Costa about to complete his 13th lap of the race. James Littlejohn has already been and gone. Manhal Alos was right out there over the AstroTurf, which has taken a fair old pounding this weekend. Lots of big, powerful cars in competition in Estoril.
Yeah, that's just taken another 8/10 out of him, so Costa and Alos now just 2 seconds apart.
They are, as we are 2.5 minutes away from the pit window opening. There is then a deficit of something like 35 seconds from Alain Costa back to Ozzy Youssef, which is going to make Tom Ashton's job very, very difficult, particularly given the pace of Johan Scheer and Alex Capardi, but also that Tony Wells is absolutely no slouch behind the wheel. But again, just looking 20 seconds less in the pits. So actually, by the time that's all shaken through, no, for Tony Wells, he's a 63 seconds clear of Ozzy Youssef, and so that still means that Tom Ashton will have to find 40 seconds on Tony in the best part of 25 minutes of racing, and that is,
I think that's probably beyond the reach of even him.
I think it's probably beyond the reach of even Fernando Alonso, to be perfectly honest. As in the Supersport class, Yanni Herpia leads that from Riccardo Dona and Marcello Maratteotto. And Alos now coming under a little bit of pressure from Alain Costa, as Andrew Ferguson has also got Yanni Herpia just beginning to come onto his tail, and Riccardo Dona is also catching Yanni Herpia as well. And Supersport battle may well get quite interesting a little bit later on, because Herpia and Dona are going single-handedly, with Marco Cincetti taking over. But Cincetti is staring down the barrel of, again, a very lengthy sojourn in the pits as a result of he and Maratteotto's successes earlier in the weekend.
Yeah, it's a real shame that we seem to have seen the Works number 60 car of Phil Abbott and Colin Noble drop out of contention, because Noble was a real star in that last race, and right in the middle of it, and ultimately took the Supersports win.
It's interesting that as Alain Costa, the car just starts to slide around underneath him as he begins to approach the turbulent air behind Manhal Alos. Again, that is a dynamic to consider. Now, are they going to, I imagine they're going to come past the pit lane open board on this occasion in about a minute's time. The pit lane open board goes out now, and then they'll probably be in next time around. But whether or not Alos can hold on until next time around is another question altogether, because he's got Alain Costa right behind him, the Monegasque driver Alain Costa. And Costa looks to the inside into the chicane. That was brave from Costa. He forces Alos out wide. Alos able to reclaim the apex, and more importantly just squirt back on the throttle, meaning that Costa can't get the switchback manoeuvre done on him. Oh, contact between the pair of them. That was never on for Alain Costa, and he ends up in the gravel trap as well. He's not going to get out of there on his own, and he saw a gap that just got closed all of a sudden.
Yes, he really didn't need to go for that, did he? Because if he'd held on just for a few more moments, he could have dived for the pit lane, and yeah, that was not a move that was on at all. So, unfortunately for Johan Scheer, his chance of the race victory has gone away. Let's have another look at it. Well, the gap was there, but it was always going to close, and unfortunately Costa then didn't get on the brakes quite quickly enough, and that has resulted in the car running back into the gravel trap. We'll find out momentarily. The situation is with whether or not he's recovered. Meanwhile, Herpia and Dona both go past Andrew Ferguson. We've got 33 minutes left in the race, and indeed there is Alain Costa. So when he does get out of the gravel trap, any hopes of a good result have gone. So it now comes down to a shootout, doesn't it, between Alex Capardi and Tony Wells. And for my money, Tony is going to have about a 27-second lead to hold on to when he emerges from his pit stop, and that is assuming that all goes well in the pits. Meanwhile, Riccardo Dona looks to line up the move on Yanni Herpia. Can't quite find a way past the Finnish driver. Both of them again running out quite wide onto the AstroTurf there, and it just seems like that having passed Ferguson there, that's given Dona a little bit of extra impetus to really hang on to the coattails of Herpia.
Of course, this battle is between two single driver entries, therefore is going to unfold later on in the race. Meanwhile, John Corbett is in to hand over to Paddy McLuhan, but the task ahead of Paddy is gigantic. Probably 4th place is the best that he can realistically aim for, with Tom Ashton taking over from Ozzy Youssef, again well poised, as now into the pit lane, not unsurprisingly, comes Manhalos. That is to hand over to Alex Kapadia.
I'm sure he'll be very relieved after that altercation to be handed over to the very, very experienced, of course, European Le Mans Series and now also GT racer Kapadia.
Here is Phil Abbott. He lost a lap with that earlier pit stop, and he is about to be caught by both Herpia and Ricardo Donor again, and that is going to make the task even harder for Colin Noble. Although I suspect Phil will probably be ducking towards the pits at the end of this lap. Also in is Alain Costa to hand over to Johan Scheer, and I think that Alain has managed to stay on the lead lap here.
Yeah, there's a slight change in the regulations for 2016. So whereas in previous years, if you were given external assistance to get going again, that was the end of your race. The regulations now enable you to continue. So at least these gentlemen drivers who do occasionally get beached can continue and finish the race.
Yeah. Now, whether or not Johan Scheer is going to have the opportunity to really fight, it remains to be seen. I think possibly Alain Costa lost too much time. And he went to the pit lane for Ricardo Donor. He takes the opportunity to rehydrate, tosses his drinks bottle aside whilst the team get to work on adjusting the tyre pressures. Also in is Phil Abbott. He has handed over to Colin Noble. Marcello Marattiotto enjoying himself a little bit too much. He's staying out on track, as is James Littlejohn, but we always knew that James was going to be out there until the last knockings because he has no imperative to come in. He wants to give Tony Wells as much of a buffer as possible to defend into the latter stages of the race, but of course it then comes down to the communication between the drivers, making sure that Alex Kapadia and Tony Wells are both fully appraised, both through their pit board and the radio, if they got that available to them, of exactly where the other driver is. Little John, as we hit half race distance, about to complete his 18th lap. His lead over Ozzy Youssef, who's the only other front runner not to have pitted in, is some 75 seconds.
Yeah, so Wells will be limbering up for this. This looks like a pretty good chance for them to take a victory, and that's going to be the world of good for their championship title hopes this year. Of course, having taken victory in race 1 as well.
Yeah, 2 wins and a 3rd place from the opening event of the season puts them in a very nice position, because you always know that there'll be 1 or 2 races a year when it all goes wrong somewhere along the line. But if you can get a consistent weekend under your belt, then that's very good news. Another combination have had a very consistent weekend, and Marcello Marattiotto and Marco Cencetti. Marattiotto eases himself out of the seat of the SR3, and indeed Cencetti puts in his own seat as he jumps in. Now here is Johan Scheer, who I suspect will be the recipient of quite a nice bottle of wine from Alain Costa tonight after that move a little bit earlier on. But nonetheless, the car doesn't appear to be damaged, and it's just a bit of a shame possibly that the momentum allowed it to be carried back into the gravel trap, because I think if the spin had been arrested, then they've only lost about 10 seconds, and that would have been recoverable. As it is, Scheer is, I guess, in a race that's been, or a weekend rather, that's been slightly attritional, as far up the order as Scheer can get is good for the championship, and there's no reason not to press on and try and pick off a few of the cars around him. I think if you look at last year at Costa and Scheer's season, you know, Costa really came of age in 2015 and took a few podium places, and I think also an overall. And that looks like a shame. Is that? It's Ozzy Youssef
coming in to take it. Oh no, he's coming to take his standard stop. That's okay.
Well, it's a shame for Ozzy Youssef, because his fun for the weekend is just about over, and Tom Ashton will jump in to the number 7 car once it has been fully refueled. The team get to work.
Yep. Dry brake refueling off and start to work on those belts. As I said, you're limited. There's only two team members allowed to work on the car during the belt change and away from the refueling procedure. So he'll need the assistance hopefully of Yusuf there just to give him a hand and get back on his way.
Now there is Alex Capardia, essentially a whole lap behind James Littlejohn. But what this is going to allow them to do now is see exactly who is running at what pace, and the answer is that on the first sector of this lap, Littlejohn was half a second quicker than Alex Capardia. I just wonder if that's a sign of Capardia getting himself up to speed, or possibly whether there is a little bit of damage to that car from the collision with Alain Costa that Capardia is trying to drive around. Well,
unusually, I mean, it's not very often that the driver who's yet to pit has a chance to actually dictate the pace slightly. And of course, if he can hold up Littlejohn, it's going to slow his. It's going to make his job much easier in the second half of the race, which is not often very possible. When does not occur very often. But if you can just keep Littlejohn honest over these next couple of laps before the pit stops close, and that's obviously going to make his work. Sure enough, Littlejohn realises that's going to only slow him down and dives into the pits.
Into the pit lane comes James Littlejohn, and he will roll along to his pit box, hands over to Tony Wells.
Meanwhile, out on track, Johan Scheer's just set the fastest lap of the race with a 1:39.9. So he's realised he's really got to get the hammer down if he wants to make a good show in this race.
Got a feeling though that he's not on the lead lap actually when it adjusts itself through, but he's already moved up ahead of Jim Booth. There's a possibility of a couple of other places he may be able to get. He sets the fastest lap of the race, in fact, 1:39.689. The fuel goes in to the Estoril. Well, certainly the team have got the opportunity to take plenty of time here, the Nielsen Racing squad, because it is 111-second pit stop. And what is that going to mean for Capardia? Now, Alex Capardia should have only had a 5-second shorter pit stop. It just seemed the way that they were running so close in tandem on the track that Capardia, well, we'll find out momentarily, that working through how long they should have been in the pits, they shouldn't have really been that close together on the track. But anyway, the pit window is closed. Everybody now has been in for their pit stop. Capardia is now doing that car's best lap of the race, so he is having the elevation and pace that he needs to. He's got a fair amount of traffic ahead of him, including Tom Ashton. I think is that going to be a battle with Ashton for position on track? It might be. Yes, it is. So Tom Ashton and Ozzy Yusuf have been able to jump Alex Capardia and Manhalalos in the pits, and that suggests that Capardia and Alos possibly had a... Oh yes, and that'd be why. A problem for Alex Capardia, who slows, and Capardia pulls off the road in the 61 car. Disaster for Capardia. Was just thinking that car shouldn't have seemed some way out of position, either a slower pit stop or some sort of problem. And now Capardia in trouble and out of the race. Great shame. It elevates then Tony Wells to the lead of the race. Ricardo Donor is second. Tom Ashton is third. This is the battle for second and third position. And with 23 minutes remaining, can only assume there was some damage done in that collision earlier on that has unfortunately now, several laps later, forced Capardia out of the race.
Yeah, we'll just see a replay here of him just seems to be really working around. Oh yeah, sure enough, there something's let go. That's a real shame, and he's coasted off the track.
Great pity, and clearly a little bit of internal damage, something rubbing against something it shouldn't have done, and
that's their weekend done. Yeah, real shame, but he really had the best chance of being able to chase down Wells. So back up the front though, there's still the issue of podiums to be battled over, and crucially this battle for third and second between Ashton and Donor.
And Johan Scheer scything his way through. Now Scheer has got the opportunity here to get himself back onto the lead lap if he can find a way past Tony Wells. He's not going to be able to drive a whole lap back past Tony, but if we were to get a safety car, then Johan Scheer starts to come back into the game, and that's what he's going to be looking to achieve, which means that for Tony, if he feels like it, there's a little bit of merit in being able to defend from Johan Scheer. How much merit, we'll find out in due course. Head through first corner. The race order is Tony Wells leads, Ricardo Dona is second, Tom Ashton is third, Yanni Herpier fourth, Paddy McLuhan fifth, Johan Scheer is in sixth, Jeremy Ferguson seventh, Marco Cenchetti in eighth, and Jim Booth in ninth. Colin Noble completing the top 10. Yeah, Tony not going to make this easy for Johan, because you never know what's going to happen. All it takes is for an ill-placed car in the gravel trap, and Tony would then have a real scrabble on the last stage of the race. At the same time, he doesn't want to risk the car when he's got a rival looking to unlap himself, and Tony allows Johan Scheer through.
No, I wouldn't at the moment in fifth place discount McLuhan, because he of course has two SR3s ahead of him at the moment, lapping in the 143s, which is, you know, he's over 3 seconds faster than Herpier in front of him. And with 22 minutes to go, that's more than easily achievable.
But Paddy McLuhan's only about 5 seconds up the road ahead of Tony Wells. There he is, turning through the chicane, and so Johan Scheer is catching McLuhan, and then there's the 18-second deficit back to Yanni Herpier. But I agree, there is the possibility, isn't there, of either McLuhan or Scheer getting onto the overall race podium. Still a third of the race to go in the concluding race of the weekend in the Radical European Masters here in Estoril. Tony Wells is the race leader. He is 75 seconds clear of Tom Ashton. Third place is Ricardo Dona, fourth Yanni Herpier, fifth Paddy McLuhan, sixth is Johan Scheer. And for Tony Wells, he is somewhat, I think, fortunate with the incident that happened behind, that if it didn't directly precipitate the elimination of Alex Cardi from the running, it certainly may have been a fairly big contributing factor. And likewise, what it's also done is taken Johan Scheer out of contention for the race victory. But 4 seconds a lap quicker than the SR3s, Johan Scheer and Paddy McLuhan have got the opportunity possibly to get themselves up into third and fourth place between now and the checkered flag.
Yeah, and it only takes a small mistake from Wells, and as you say, a trip through the gravel trap, and particularly even Ashton, who's at the moment is lapping around a second a lap quicker than Wells in front of him, you know, could go right into contention. So really, this is a time he needs to stay focused, and as we've said before, you know, not overdrive the car, just keep those steering inputs minimal and reduce the load on the tyres, and you know, that's ultimately the way he's going to take a checkered flag.
I think sometimes as a driver, it's very important actually not to think about the broader context of the race and just get the job done, do the lap times that you need to do, and not worry or wonder that the race is fairly stable around you. There's Tom Ashton in second position. Ashton, of course, pulling clear of Ricardo Dona. There is Dona just behind him. And Dona, the super sport leader as well. The question, of course, is going to be whether or not he is going to have the energy really to retain a good level of pace through to the checkered flag. Yanni Herpier some 8 seconds behind Tim. Paddy McLuhan now within 11 seconds of Yanni. Johan Scheer just behind as well.
Yeah, so I mean, really, this is down to McLuhan and Scheer, I think, to scalp that final podium position. But they're so closely matched at the moment. Scheer again, another quick lap there with the 141. So there really is nothing to call between this pair, and I think possibly Scheer just has a slight edge on pace.
Yeah, whether or not you can find a way past Paddy McLuhan though, said 1.8 seconds a lap quicker for Johan Scheer, and those two cars now running together out on track, cars 74 and 20. So McLuhan and Scheer, the battle for 5th and 6th, that is coming together. Tom Ashton in second place. Well, it's a good reward for himself and Aussie Yusuf, because they could have been in contention for the win earlier on, but for the way that the safety car came into the race and for the duration it stayed out. And as is often the case, sometimes it then swings back the other way. A couple of the cars that safety car favoured in race 1 now out of contention for the winning rate in race 2 rather, now out of contention for a good result in race 3. So looking down the back straight, there's Ricardo Dona, then Colin Noble, and then we have got Johan Scheer, who is up ahead of Paddy McLuhan at the very back of your picture, and Johan Scheer has found a way past McLuhan that last lap and is now reeling in Yanni Herpia, and that would be quite an incredible result for Johan Scheer and Alain Costa if the car that has been removed from the gravel track with the external assistance comes through and finishes this race on the podium. And it's looking really quite likely, I'd suggest, because Scheer only needs to get 14 seconds in order to overhaul Ricardo Dona.
Yeah, you consider that he will have achieved all that in less than 2/3 of a race. So yeah, it's been quite a remarkable turn of pace from Scheer, who only really joined the Radical Grid sort of midway through 2015, and has just really got acquainted well with that SR8 that he shares with Costa. But yeah, he's got a fantastic opportunity now. The gap just closed to 6 seconds from Herpia, and you know, with some. He's nearly 5 seconds a lap quicker than that SR3 in front of him. So in the next 2 laps, he's going to be right on his tail.
Certainly is. And I was going to say that overtaking the SR3s hasn't proved to be the work of the moment, but the exception to that rule all weekend has been Johan Scheer, who seems to have got that SR8 working as if it's an SR3, the crispness of the turn-in.
Yeah, the front end grip's just been like it's on rails, and you see you can just put the car wherever he wants in the braking zones. He can just carry so much more speed into the apexes than most of his rivals, and that's really given him a huge advantage this weekend. So not so much straight line speed, but you know, that's pretty comparable with his peers. But certainly the approach into the braking zones and heading for the apex, he can just put the car in a place where really his rivals have no option but to back off.
Johan Scheer already powers past Yanni Herpia, gains the 4th place.
Yeah, makes really light work of that, and now he can start his charge towards Ricardo Dona.
So Ricardo Dona is the next target, and Paddy McLuhan has now got a stop and go penalty as well for having too short a pit stop. Not that I don't think that's actually going to have much bearing. Well, no, it is. It's going to demote Paddy down to 8th place. Should be disappointing for him, having enjoyed the triumph of victory in race 1. Johan Scheer, as we hit 3/4 race distance, and in pursuit of Ricardo Dona. Tony Wells, our race leader. Tom Ashton in 2nd place. 3rd is Ricardo Dona. He leads the Supersport class. 4th is Johan Scheer. 5th is Yanni Herpia. 2nd in the Supersport runners. 6th is Paddy McLuhan. 7th, Marco Cenchetti, who completes the Supersport podium ahead of Jeremy Ferguson, Jim Booth and Colin Noble. And, well, you could watch Johan Scheer in this mood all day, couldn't you? But, of course, he's got to pick up the points now because it's such a varied calendar ahead for the Radical European Masters. Next stop, of course, Spa-Francorchamps on the 21st and 22nd of May, which we think is going to be very much Spider territory given the length and pace of some of the straights.
When you consider that there's 126 points available from every weekend, you know, with the new scoring system, it's absolutely imperative that in these early stages the guys just keep it consistent and notch up the wins. There's no point taking risk at this point in the season. You need to get some good solid results behind your belt, and then hopefully then that puts you in an opportunity where you can take some risk and maybe gamble on pace and set up later in the season.
Because we see it time and time again that the drivers that make the running early in the year, they're the ones who can afford to take the risks later on in the season and maybe go that slightly different direction with setup or the like.
Because you give yourself options. Ultimately, you've got more freedom in terms of experimenting, and you've given yourself a buffer in terms of points that you can afford to go for the overall silverware and not have to worry about it if it doesn't all go to plan.
Into turn 6 for Paddy McLuhan.
But I would expect no real surprise at all if this season doesn't go down to the wire just as it has in previous years. If you look at last year's season, that went down to the very final round at Barcelona for the overall title, and for the Supersports class down to the last lap. So as always, I'm sure it's going to be tight when we get to the finale in Jerez.
certainly will be. Looking forward to the finale in Erith, which of course is where last year's championship started. And again, it's a nice variety for the drivers, isn't it, this championship, because although you have some perennial favourites, you do tend to mix up the circuits through the year and also the time of the year that you visit them.
It's cyclical, that's right, and the challenges of the circuits can be very different. So Spa-Francorchamps, for example, which is the next circuit that we'll be visiting in just a few weeks' time, is much earlier than last year's date in September. And as you say, the weather conditions and the track will feel very different from how it feels in sort of early, late summer, early autumn. But we've got some other great circuits this year. Paul Ricard makes a welcome return of for a fast and very flat circuit in the south of France, and it's interesting. We've really had a roll of the dice with the weather there in previous years. One year it's been in blazing sunshine, and the other in the rain. So it's anyone's guess what'll happen there. Likewise with Monza as well, and obviously perennial favourites like Silverstone. We've got a second UK round this year in Europe with Donington Park, which makes a really welcome return. And, it'll be interesting.
Certainly shall be. And Johan Scheer now making the move on Riccardo Dona. That puts Scheer into third position now. It's a fantastic recovery drive from Johan Scheer. And it's one, again, that could be very significant a little bit later on in the championship. Meanwhile, Jeremy Ferguson's just set the fastest pace through the speed trap of the race, 274.8 kilometres an hour. Which, if you did that on the motorway, would probably be the end of your relationship with your driving licence.
Yeah, it shows you just how much pace. You think these new RXC Spider turbos have got the same specification engine as the GT3 car that's been racing in GT Open this weekend. Only difference, of course, being that in our own championships they can be de-restricted, so they're running in excess of 600 horsepower, and it's very much an LMP2 pace. The platform's very similar in terms of size and dimension to the old Le Mans SR9 car, so it's a real muscly bit of kit to drive. As we see there, Noble on a fantastic recovery to pass Dona.
So unlapping himself there is Colin Noble. The problem he's got is that Cenchetti, the third place car in the class, he's about 80 seconds up the road, and that isn't going to be achievable for Colin Noble in the next 10 minutes or thereabouts. And in fact, the order now is looking like it is fairly settled, barring disaster through to the flag. Most of the people that were catching each other have caught each other. Yeah,
the only question you might ask is whether or not Scheer's able to catch up to the back of Ashton. At the moment, he's lapping some 3 seconds a lap faster than Scheer with just under 10 minutes to go.
And also, Cenchetti is a couple of seconds lap quicker than Yanni Herp here, and that's 13 seconds between them. So, there are a couple of gaps that may find themselves being eased down. What is in no doubt whatsoever is that, barring a fairly catastrophic problem, Tony Wells has got this win sewn up. Here is Marco Cenchetti, third in the Supersport class, about to go a lap down to Tony Wells. Now, Paddy McLuhan's not come in to serve his stop and go penalty, and I suspect that Brian Poulter is on the cusp of getting a bit fed up about this, because you've only got 3 laps of which to serve your stop and go penalty, and I'm pretty sure it's been 3 laps on this lap, or possibly he's even gone past it since we got that notification.
Yeah, I'm sure there's somebody from the team manager of that team's probably up in race control now, and there's some heated debate. I wouldn't at all be surprised, but as you say, there's not a huge amount of time left here, and of course the repercussions for missing your step go are far more serious.
There is Paddy McLuhan, so he stayed out for another lap, and I guess the only explanation I can think of as McLuhan picks his way past Riccardo Dona, and actually that moves him up into 4th place in the race overall, is that McLuhan's team clearly think that there's been a missed call by...
Oh, and a big slide there for McLuhan, though. He won't he won't want to be doing that at all.
I just wonder if McLuhan's team think that maybe there's some sort of timing loop glitch which has given that penalty, and they're possibly debating the point now and keeping Paddy out on track whilst that conversation continues.
Yeah, and all the while, of course, the clock's counting down towards the end of the race.
But to not obey a black flag and a stop-and-go penalty is to potentially invite an awful lot of disciplinary trouble, because the word of the race director is fairly final.
Yeah, what's new for this year is that all of the teams now have to run radio skiing. So, rather than just relying solely on pit bulls, now all of the teams are available for radio communication, which obviously makes the possibility of getting these acting on much more immediate.
It also makes the "I didn't see my pit board" excuse much
more
harder.
difficult. Yes, it does.
And we're seeing this in quite a few championships as well, actually. There are other championships that set up a direct radio channel from race control, and clearly Paddy McLuhan's also tuned into our commentary because he has decided that now is the moment to come in for that stop and go penalty. Comes to a halt for 3 seconds. Quite a long 3 seconds.
And
when he loses the engine.
Car.
And now gets back underway.
He just wants to be careful he doesn't break the speed limit on the way out, as we have seen before, of course. Not necessarily with Paddy, but that's there's nothing more frustrating than coming into your pit box and then subsequently serving a second penalty for breaking it on the way out.
Yeah, that is also the point at which the penalty points on your licence start to be making an appearance. Tony Wells comfortably in control. We're watching the second place car, Tom Ashton. Johan Shear is in third place, and Ashton's now elevated his pace somewhat to manage that challenge from Johan Shear. 6 minutes and 20 seconds left in the race, and this is one of those races that might not have been quite as exciting as the first two we've seen this season, but could be absolutely critical when we get towards the championship deciding point of the year, because essentially here for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, they have had a free pass with the retirement of Alex Kapadia and Manhalals. They've also probably have got an unexpected win after the problems for Alain Costa and Johan Shear.
As you say, it's for Shear and Costa having that disastrous spin. That's ultimately, almost certainly, really what turned the race on its head. And I'm sure that Wells and Littlejohn will be thanking their lucky stars for that turn of events, because really in one move that eliminated both of their main rivals from the race.
Yeah, you wonder if Nielsen Racing will be nominating Alain Costa as the driver of the weekend for the assistants, but it swings and roundabouts. It's easy to overanalyse an incident at this stage of the year. There's still so much racing to go, and particularly when we get on to Spa-Francorchamps, which is a circuit more than Estoril, where here in Estoril, if a driver makes a mistake, because of the radius of the corners and the relative speed of them, all that really tends to happen is they run a little bit wide. Spa is a circuit that bites. The drivers have got to be on absolutely maximum concentration and commitment that weekend. And of course in Spa, the weather comes in two flavours. It's either raining or about to rain, and therefore even with a late May date, there is every likelihood that the track conditions will be somewhat variable.
Yeah, I'm sure precipitation will come into play at some point during the weekend, and it's not even necessarily across the whole circuit, as you find so often at Spa. It can be dry in one place and soaking wet in another. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting season, particularly when you consider that this year, of course, we don't have any of the previous Radical Masters class champions on the grid this year, with 360 Racing's Terence Woodward and Ross Kaiser having moved up into European Le Mans Series, and so for the first time, really, it is anybody's. It's all to play for. Anybody here could scoop it.
Now, are we going to see a late change for second and third place? Johan Shear has been inexorably catching Tom Ashton. A lot of this is going to come down to the point where Tony Wells is on the track, and therefore how many additional laps they have to run. I think it's probably going to be this and maybe 3 more, which will give Johan Shear just a bit more of an opportunity to do something about Tom Ashton. Ashton, I get the feeling, is probably driving the car which has been set up very much to Ozzy Yusuf's preference, and therefore looks like it has got a lot of front-end downforce, but also quite a little bit of a lower profile of the rear wing, possibly to offset that downforce, whereas Johan Shear a little bit less in the way of front downforce.
Yeah, and if you look, there's twin front dive planes on the front of that yellow SR8 versus the no dive planes at all of the car that Shear's got. So in terms of mechanical grip, it's quite even more impressive really that she has been able to put the car where he wants when he hasn't got that same level of dive plane.
I think he's got one
just
dive
one
plane.
set. I think I think you're right there, but it does make a difference. And really with the front dive planes, it's confidence more necessarily than outright grip or speed. It just gives you a different feel to the car, and it's not always for everybody. It's much more about how it feels and your perception of the way that the car grips, rather than necessarily anything that's sort of empirical. It's quite an interesting. Sure, if there, Costa jinks out, takes a look to the left as well, but Ashton continues to cover his line.
He does. That was very close, wasn't it? Again, but Johan Scheer, where is Tony Wells? He's 51 seconds up the road. It's going to be touch and go, in fact, whether or not Tony goes into the final lap of the race momentarily. And he's got the advantage that if he wants to back off to make absolutely certain that it is going to be the final lap of the race, or that his next lap is going to, or slow down enough on the next lap to
ensure that that's his last as well.
Yeah. And it is going to be the final lap when Tony Wells comes past us, because there is less than a lap time left in the race, which means for Johan Scheer, he's got to get the hurry up here. He's got 1.5 laps now to find a way past Tom Ashton. Ashton knows that he just needs to focus on a few critical corner exit points, and that will do the trick for him. Now, where can Scheer find a way through? He's been so good into the chicane. Tom Ashton is well aware of that.
Yeah, and a little bit of a slide there as well by Scheer from the rear end. The back end of that SR8 just starting to look a little bit loose, but has Ashton left the door open here for him? Yes, he has. No, shuts the door again on the left-hander for the switchback.
Tom Ashton is too wise and canny. He knows exactly where he needs to place the car to make it as difficult as possible for Johan Scheer to get through. But Scheer has just got this amazing ability to drive through the turbulent air of the car in front, and to stay that close through the parabolica really takes some doing. And what that means now is that Scheer has got the advantage as they start the final lap of the race, bobbing and weaving behind Tom Ashton. Ashton consults in the mirror as he's boxed Scheer to the outside. Scheer's going to go for it. Ashton makes sure there's no way through. Now into turn 2. Scheer not quite close enough to force the issue. And he now needs to regroup, regather himself, and come back at the car of Tom Ashton. Here, meanwhile, is our race leader, Tony Wells. Wells and Littlejohn, I don't think that they could have asked for an awful lot more from this opening weekend of the season. 2 victories and a 3rd place, and this is a win where you don't get many that are much more comfortable than this. As Tony Wells heads through the final corner, the checker flag is ready and waiting, and Tony Wells and James Littlejohn win the 3rd round of the Radical European Masters season, and do it in fairly dominant fashion as well. But what about the fight for 2nd place? They have still got half a lap to decide this one way or another, as they swing into the chicane. Climbing steeply uphill again. Well placed from Tom Ashton. He knows what he's doing. He's prepared to let Scheer challenge the outside at turn 12, because he knows that's not going to work. Instead, Johan Scheer might have to dig deep. Is he prepared to try a brave move into the parabolica? He committed to the inside, and he forces Tom Ashton a little bit offline. It's going to be a drag race line. This is going to be very, very close for 2nd place. Is Scheer going to be able to pull out of the bubble in time as the pair of them sprint towards the flag? Scheer leaves it too late, and 2nd place goes to Tom Ashton and Ozzy Yusuf, with 3rd place to Johan Scheer and Alain Costa. And that was very well defended from Tom Ashton in the late stages.
Yeah, he really come under pressure in the closing stages there, and you do wonder as they came through one of the final chicanes there, whether or not that momentary skip over the last chicane and a slight loss in momentum was really what cost Scheer coming with the drive over the final line. But yeah, fantastic showdown there, and a great way to end the weekend.
So we will be back on the 21st and 22nd of May at Spa-Francorchamps for the Radical European Masters Championship. That triple header again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, triple header. So 360 minute races on one of Europe's fastest circuits. I can't wait.
No, really looking forward to it, and you'll be able to, of course, watch it in all of the usual places, specifically YouTube and Radical's page on YouTube at that. Now let's have a look then at the final results. So Tony Wells and James Littlejohn winning it 48 seconds clear of Ozzy Youssef and Tom Ashton, then Alain Costa and Johan Scheer. Riccardo Dona in fourth, and he wins the Supersport class from Yanni Herpier and Marcello Maratiotto and Marco Cencetti. Ferguson's finished in seventh, clear of John Corbett, Paddy McLuhan. Then Phil Abbott and Colin Noble and Jim Booth. Disaster for Manhalos and Alex Kapadia, with Alex pulling off early in his stint. So that means in terms of the championship that Wells and Littlejohn will be leaving Estoril with a comfortable championship lead. But the pace of others this weekend has shown that they're not going to have it all their own way. So let's have a look then back at the highlights of the race then. And from the start, James Littlejohn knew that he needed to get the jump and keep Andrew Ferguson behind him into turn one. That's exactly what happened, as behind it all went a little bit sideways for Riccardo Dona. There was some great scrapping going on behind Marcello Maratiotto and John Corbett, switching places on several occasions. Riccardo Dona, having had that spin, recovering very nicely through the field, although he had to get his elbows out a little bit to find a way past Marcello Maratiotto. This was arguably the moment on which the race turned. A slightly misjudged move from Alain Costa, tagging Manhalos. Costa spun, but the damage to that section of Alos's car eventually poured forth with smoke, post pit stops forcing Alex Kapadia into retirement. Meanwhile, Yanni Herpier and Riccardo Dona having a good scrap for Supersport. Honours eventually to be decided in favour of Riccardo Dona. This was the moment, unfortunately, for Alex Kapadia. It all went wrong coming out of turn one, and the white smoke meant game over for he and Manhal Alos, and the loss of potentially vital championship points. That then released Tony Wells and James Littlejohn to come through and take a comfortable victory. They won it from Tom Ashton and Ozzy Youssef, with Johan Scheer and Alain Costa in third, and Riccardo Dona our Supersport winner. So thank you very much for joining us this weekend here in Estoril for the Radical European Masters. And from Will Brown and Ben Evans, we'll say goodbye and see you in Spa.